My mother-in-law always hated me. One day, I overheard her telling my husband, leave her before she finds out the truth. Confused, I decided to investigate. What I discovered left me shocked. My husband was living a double life with. I never thought my life would turn into something straight out of a drama series. But here I am, writing this because I need to get it off my chest. It's been a whirlwind of emotions, and even now, thinking about it feels surreal. For context, I've been married to Mark for 7 years. We met in college in Chicago. He was charming, attentive, and had that confident yet kind personality that drew people in. I thought I hit the jackpot. Our life together was good, at least I thought so. We had a nice home in the suburbs, stable jobs, and I believed we were happy. The only cloud in my sky was his mother, Barbara. Barbara never liked me. From the moment we met, she had this passive-aggressive way of making me feel small. If I brought a dish to family gatherings, she'd find something wrong with it. If I got a promotion, she'd say something like, must be nice to work somewhere that doesn't demand too much. It was always subtle, never outright cruel, but enough to chip away at my confidence over time. Mark always brushed it off, saying, that's just how she is. Don't take it personally. So I didn't. But everything changed one afternoon. Mark had left his phone at home, and I wasn't snooping, I swear. I went into our bedroom to grab some laundry when I heard voices. At first, I thought maybe Mark had come back early and was on the phone. But as I got closer, I realized the voices were coming from his office, through the thin wall that separated it from our bedroom. He was on speakerphone. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but then I heard Barbara's voice, sharp and clear, Mark, you can't keep dragging this out. Leave her before she finds out the truth. My heart stopped. I froze, trying to process what I'd just heard. Leave me? What truth? Mark replied, his voice lower, frustrated, but I couldn't catch everything he said. My mind raced with possibilities. Was he hiding financial trouble? A secret family? I didn't know. But I knew one thing, I had to find out. I spent the next few days acting like nothing had happened. I smiled, made dinner, and carried on as usual, even though inside, I was unraveling. When Mark left for work, I started digging. I checked our shared accounts, his emails, we had each other's passwords, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then I remembered his old laptop, the one he said he didn't use anymore. It was tucked away in the closet. Curiosity got the better of me, and I powered it up. To my surprise, it wasn't password protected. I felt a pang of guilt, but the memory of Barbara's words pushed me forward. That's when I found the folder. Hidden under generic file names was a collection of emails, documents, and photos. My hands shook as I clicked through them. Mark wasn't having an affair, not in the traditional sense. He had another life entirely. He had a second apartment in the city, fully furnished, paid for under a different name. There were emails with lease agreements, receipts, and photos of him hosting gatherings there. But it wasn't just the apartment. There were documents for a business I didn't know existed, a consulting firm registered under a name I'd never heard of. And then, the photos. They weren't romantic, but they were personal. Mark with different groups of people, none of whom I recognized. Him at events, dinners, even vacations. All without me. In some, he looked like a completely different person, dressed differently, acting differently. It was like he had two versions of himself, the Mark I knew and this other man. My heart raced as I pieced it together. He had created an entirely separate identity. But why? I confronted him that evening. I couldn't pretend any longer. I waited until after dinner, when the house was quiet. I sat across from him, my heart pounding. Mark, I said slowly, I need to ask you something. He looked up, his usual easy smile fading when he saw my expression. What's going on? He asked. I didn't beat around the bush. I know about the apartment. The business. The photos. I know. His face drained of color. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then, he sighed, rubbing his face with his hands. It's not what you think, he started. I laughed, sharp and bitter. Really? Because it looks like you're living a double life. And that's when the real story unfolded. Mark admitted that he'd been living this other life for almost 4 years. But it wasn't about infidelity or anything criminal. He had started the business without telling me because he didn't think I'd support it. He wanted to take risks, make fast money, and live differently, without the responsibilities that came with our life together. The apartment? His escape, as he called it. A place where he could pretend to be someone else, free from the expectations of being a husband. I was stunned. So, what was I? I asked quietly. He looked down. You were my real life. That was just an outlet. An outlet. Like I was the job he clocked into, and that was his hobby. I didn't cry. I felt too hollow for that. I just stood up, walked out, and drove to my sister's house. That was 6 months ago. I'm still untangling everything, emotionally and legally. The divorce process is ongoing, and every day feels like peeling back another layer of a life I thought I knew. But you know what? I'm grateful in a strange way. Barbara's cruelty, Mark's lies, they showed me the truth. I deserved more than being someone's real life while they played pretend elsewhere. After I left that night, I thought the worst was behind me. I was wrong. Staying at my sister's place gave me space to think, but my mind wouldn't rest. I kept replaying Mark's words, "You were my real life." That was just an outlet. Like I was a box he checked off, and everything else was the life he actually wanted. But something didn't sit right. If it was just an outlet, why was Barbara so desperate for him to leave me before I found out? What was she afraid of? It didn't add up. I decided to dig deeper. I went back to our house one afternoon when I knew Mark would be at work. I told him I needed to pick up some of my things, and he didn't object. The house felt empty, even though everything was exactly where I'd left it. I walked through the rooms like a stranger, trying to find pieces of the truth hidden in plain sight. In his office, I noticed the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet was locked. Mark wasn't the type to keep things under lock and key, at least not that I knew of. But the key was right there on his desk, like he never thought I'd bother looking. Inside, I found a stack of documents. Some were related to his business, but buried underneath was something else, letters. Handwritten letters, old but carefully kept. They were addressed to Mark, from someone named Celia. I'd never heard of her. Curiosity turned into dread as I read the first one. Celia's words were affectionate, intimate, not romantic, but filled with familiarity. She talked about their plans, keeping the secret, and protecting what matters most. What secret? Then, I found it, an envelope with hospital records. At first, I thought it was Mark's, but when I read the name, my heart stopped. It was mine. My medical records. Why would Mark have these? I scanned through the pages, my hands trembling. That's when I saw it, something that didn't make sense. A record from a hospital in St. Louis, dated years before I ever met Mark. I'd never been to St. Louis. Ever. But there it was, my name, my birth date, even my old address. Confused, I took photos of everything and left. Back at my sister's, I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I called the hospital in St. Louis, pretending I was verifying information for a family history project. The woman on the phone was polite but firm. "I'm sorry, but we can't disclose patient information without proper authorization." I tried to let it go, but the gnawing feeling wouldn't leave me alone. A week later, I hired a private investigator. I didn't tell anyone, not my sister, not my friends. I just needed answers. It took him less than 2 weeks to come back with something that turned my world upside down. Celia wasn't just some random person. She was connected to Barbara. In fact, they'd grown up in the same small town outside of St. Louis. But that wasn't the bombshell. The real shock. Celia was my biological mother. I stared at the investigator like he'd spoken another language. "That's not possible," I whispered. "My mother passed away when I was a baby. I've seen the photos, the birth certificate, everything." He handed me more documents. Adoption papers. Legal but quietly tucked away. My whole life, I believed I was someone's daughter when, in reality, I'd been part of something much more complicated. Mark knew. That's why he had my medical records. That's why Barbara wanted him to leave me, before I found out. But why? Why would any of this matter now? I confronted Mark again. This time, I wasn't calm. I walked straight into his office, threw the papers on his desk, and said, "Explain. Now." He didn't deny it. He just sat there, looking tired, like he'd been waiting for this moment. "Yes," he said quietly. "Celia was your mother. My mother, Barbara, knew her. They were friends once. Celia wasn't well. She had problems, made bad choices. When you were born, she wasn't capable of raising you. My mother helped arrange everything." "Helped?" I snapped. "You mean hid everything?" Mark rubbed his temples. It wasn't supposed to be a secret forever. But then we met, and it got complicated. Complicated? I laughed bitterly. You mean you married me, knowing all along? Why? Why would you do that? He hesitated, then looked me straight in the eyes. Because I loved you. And because my mother thought you were a mistake I needed to correct. The words hit me like a punch. Barbara didn't just hate me, she saw me as a problem. Something to erase. I left without another word. But it didn't end there. A few days later, the investigator called again. He'd found Celia. She was alive. Alive. She was living in a small town in Missouri, under a different name. I didn't know how to feel, angry, betrayed, curious, scared. But I had to see her. When I arrived at her modest little house, I sat in the car for almost an hour, staring at the door. Finally, I forced myself to knock. An older woman answered, her eyes tired but sharp. She looked at me for a long moment before saying softly, "You look just like her." I swallowed hard. Like who? She smiled sadly. Like me. That was the beginning of another story, one filled with answers I wasn't sure I wanted, but needed all the same. Turns out, the past has a way of finding you, no matter how deep people try to bury it. And sometimes, the truth isn't just shocking, it's the key to understanding who you really are. Standing there on Celia's porch, hearing her call me her daughter, it felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. My whole life had been built on lies, carefully stacked like a fragile tower. And now it was collapsing, one truth at a time. Celia invited me in. Her home was small, simple, but warm. We sat across from each other at a small wooden table. She looked older than I expected, her face marked by years of hardship, but her eyes were sharp and filled with something I didn't expect, regret. She didn't sugarcoat anything. Celia told me she'd been young, reckless, and struggling with addiction when she had me. She wasn't capable of being a mother back then. Barbara, who was once her friend, offered to help. But help wasn't what Barbara had in mind. She manipulated the situation, convincing Celia to give me up under the promise that I'd be adopted by a loving family. Instead, Barbara used her connections to quietly place me with distant relatives, people who had no idea about the full story. She kept tabs on me, always pulling strings in the background. When I met Mark in college, it wasn't a coincidence. Barbara knew exactly who I was. It wasn't fate. It was planned. Barbara didn't expect Mark to actually fall for me. I was supposed to be a temporary part of his life, a mistake to be corrected. But we got married, and that ruined her plan. I left Celia's house feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. But something changed in me that day. The shock faded, replaced by something stronger, anger. Not the kind that makes you cry, but the kind that sharpens your focus. I wasn't going to let Barbara or Mark control my story anymore. I wanted revenge, not the petty kind. I wanted something that would hit them where it hurt the most, their pride, their reputation, their carefully constructed lives. I started with Mark's business. Remember the consulting firm he'd hidden from me? Well, thanks to the documents I'd found, I knew enough to dig deeper. I discovered shady financial dealings, nothing illegal, but definitely unethical. He'd been hiding profits, dodging taxes, and faking reports to make the company look more successful than it was. I gathered every piece of evidence, organized it neatly, and sent it to his business partners anonymously. I knew how important his reputation was in his industry. He thrived on being seen as the golden boy, the successful entrepreneur with the perfect life. The fallout was immediate. His partners were furious. Investors pulled out. Contracts were cancelled. His company crumbled from the inside out, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But that wasn't enough. Barbara had always cared about appearances, her perfect family, her spotless image in her social circles. So I decided to tear down that mask too. I wrote everything. My story, the truth about my adoption, how she manipulated my life, and how she orchestrated the whole twisted connection with Mark. I didn't post it online or make a scene. No, I printed it, bound it neatly, and sent copies to everyone in her circle, her friends, her charity boards, her bridge club. People she'd spent years trying to impress. I even sent a copy to the local newspaper under an anonymous tip, framing it as an exposé on the hidden lives of respectable families. The aftermath was glorious. Mark's business was in ruins. He tried to save face, but without his polished image, he was just another guy who'd lost everything. He reached out to me once, leaving a voicemail, "Why are you doing this?" I didn't respond. Barbara, on the other hand, was socially destroyed. The woman who once looked down on me with thinly veiled disdain couldn't show her face without whispers following her. Her carefully curated world crumbled, and there was nothing she could do about it. The best part? I didn't have to scream, fight, or beg for justice. I just let the truth do its job. As for me, I finalized the divorce, sold the house, and moved to a new city. I even built a relationship with Celia, not perfect, but real. I found peace not in forgetting what happened, but in owning my story. And the best revenge? Living a life so full, so unapologetically mine, that their memory feels like nothing more than a faded chapter in a book I've long since closed.